It's Bill Harlow, host of this edition of the Cipher Brief's Cover Stories podcast. Library and bookstore shelves are packed with books about and sometimes by former CIA officers. But one category of books is underserved. That's the ones about the spouses and family members of agency officers. Today I'll be talking with Rosie Mowatt-Larssen, who is doing her bit to address that imbalance by writing her just-published book, Story of a CIA Wife, Married to the Craft. Rosie was born in Germany and married to a U.S. Army officer, Ralph Mowatt-Larssen. She was enjoying life in the U.S. as an Army spouse when Ralph surprised her by joining the CIA. What followed was a lifetime of service and sacrifice by the entire Mowatt-Larssen family. We'll talk with her about life overseas, how agency spouses are often pressed into service carrying out their partner's clandestine mission. Let's get underway. Rosie Mowatt-Larssen, welcome to the Cipher Brief's Cover Stories podcast.
Thank you, Bill.
We appreciate your joining us today to talk about your book, Story of a CIA Wife, Married to the Craft. And while there's no shortage of books about CIA officers and sometimes by CIA officers, there really is a shortage of books about the families of those officers and what the burdens they carry and the services and sacrifices that they make. I wonder if you could tell us why you decided to write this book.
This is exactly why, Bill, as you said, there's nothing out there about the spouses who also sacrifice, and I wanted to show their contributions that they make. And in fact, it's not just CIA spouses, but I'm talking about, I want all the spouses to know that they are appreciated and all the contributions they make, because they're really the backbone of a family. And the only difference with the CIA spouse is that we have to live a life of secrecy. And that's not always an easy part of the business.
One of the things that you don't spend a lot of time in the book talking about is your personal backstory. How did you and your husband Ralph meet?
Well, we were very young. Rolf was stationed in Germany, and I worked part-time in the officers' club where we met, but we really got to know each other because we ran into each other at the same discotheque in Germany.
And he was an Army officer at the time, right?
Yes, he was a lieutenant at the time. Mm-hmm.
And Ralph is well known to Cipher Brief readers as a Cipher Brief expert. He's frequently written and been interviewed for the publication, so he's well known from his later days as a CIA officer. But as I understand it from the book, you were enjoying life as an Army spouse, and were a bit surprised when Ralph told you that he decided to trade in his Army uniform for a CIA trench coat.
Yeah, I was, it sort of came out of nowhere. I knew he applied. I think it was more of, it wasn't anything planned. We were on vacation, and one day he just said, I think I'm going to apply to CIA, and he also applied for the FBI. And sure enough, he got into both. He chose CIA, which did come as a shock because, I mean, he liked the Army. He was a captain. He had a great future ahead of him. He was supposed to go to West Point and teach at West Point, and I really wanted to go. I enjoyed the Army life. I loved everything about it. The discipline, the networking, I felt support and safety. We used to live on the base, so yeah, I enjoyed everything about it. I certainly didn't want to change that lifestyle. But yeah, what does one do? We made a decision and went ahead.
And as I understand, particularly in the early days of Ralph's time with the agency, there wasn't a lot of support for spouses. Is that right? And I understand that hopefully has changed, but at the time, there wasn't a lot of support for you as a new CIA spouse.
Yeah, it was a difficult time, especially because as soon as we moved up to this area, we had been at Fort Bliss in Texas, so we had to move up here. And yeah, it was really hard because Rolf had to leave for his training, so he was gone pretty much, for the whole time. He would come home on weekends at time. But I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody from the agency. I didn't know anybody up here. It was very, very difficult. Eventually, I had to make a life for myself, and I answered an ad for a Berlitz German instructor. Remember back in those days, you still had ads in a newspaper. Mm-hmm. I actually sort of miss those days. But yes, so I started working at Berlitz as a German instructor. And only because of that, I met people and life became a little bit easier.
But then as his career went on, you were also offered the opportunity to take language training within the CIA so that you could learn the languages along with Rolf for the countries that you were going to be assigned to. So you would both be proficient in the places that you were going. So your abilities with languages certainly helped play a role in your success and his success going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Once Rolf was done with the training and we started our life, we had our first overseas assignment. So preparing for that, as you said, I went through training with him. It was a wonderful time. I enjoyed it very much. Then it started to get exciting and I enjoyed it very much. And then we went overseas for our first assignment.
And how many years did you and Rolf spend overseas on behalf of the agency?
16, 17. So Rolf had one assignment without me, and that was after the Soviet Union fell apart. We opened up shop in the different ex-republics. So he went to one of the republics. So he was gone for several months to do that, and we stayed back. Other than that, we always had our assignments together, which was nice. And that was about 17 years overseas.
That's a long stretch overseas without headquarters tours to break it up and things like that.
Yes, so it sure was. Yes.
It was quite a stretch that you had. Now, readers of your book will note in some cases you only give like vague descriptions of where you are. You say Southern Europe without being more precise. Other times it's because of what you're allowed to say. You can say, for instance, that one assignment when you were in Moscow, but it must have been difficult as you were writing the book to navigate that, where you could be precise and where you couldn't.
It was, but yes, it was. But I knew enough. Having worked, then later in the years, I worked as a staff officer myself, so I knew enough what needed to be done, because I wrote this book after I retired. And also Rolf wrote a book, State of Mind, CIA and the Faith, and going through that with him, what he needed to redact, what he could write. So I had an idea what I needed to do. It's of course, that's the way it is, because we have to get approval from our publication. But it's sad because people who don't realize we need to get approval for our writing, they might think, what is she trying to do? Is she trying to be secret, But so I don't want our readers to think that, but I would imagine that there will be some readers who think I'm trying to be cute and secret.
Well, one of the other things that comes through the book loud and clear is that you weren't just trailing along, that you were often pressed into service, what was called a contract spouse.
Yeah.
And that you were trained in a lot of the tradecraft that CIA officers, case officers use, and were called on to use that training on many occasions. I wonder, what kind of skills did you learn, and what kind of things were you asked to employ during the course of your several tours?
So I was very fortunate, because our first tour, I could work at the station, and the reason at the time was because of my language ability. But as time went on, I got to do more than language related things. I was sent to our special training center to work with miniature cameras to load the film and develop the film. In fact, when I say miniature, I mean miniature. I had to work with tweezers to maneuver it, and secret writing. We had the writing the paper that you put in a special chemical solution, and then you see the writing. You see the writing that we would get from the asset, and the asset would see the writing that we are sending him. So I got to do that at our first assignment. It was, I can't even tell you how I felt. I felt so, so proud. And the other thing is, I think we are the only intel agency that hires naturalized citizens. And to be a naturalized citizen, not having been born in this country, and I was trusted and given this opportunity. It's an honor. It's an honor that I felt throughout the years. An honor and the pride. I can't even explain how proud I am.
And you raised 3 children in all these diverse locations, and sometimes the kids are also sort of unwittingly perhaps helping with the tradecraft. You'd use them as you would go out on a family outing and convince possible surveillance that you were just going sledding or something like that.
My gosh, yeah,
So that
it was so long ago, but I remember the day so clearly. It was a New Year's Day, so we attended a New Year's party. Of course, it was really no fun and enjoyment for me. I just had my head full of what we needed to do the next day. And yeah, so we at the time we had our son Eric and our daughter Christina. Christina was very little, but Eric was old enough where he thought, what are we doing out here? In fact, when we did our sledding outing, because we had to, the reason was that we had to detect surveillance. How close were they? Did we really have to? Did we have to look for them? Did we have to pull them out? So it was, of course, one of those cold days, and we could stay outside maybe for 2 minutes, and I rushed the kids back to the car, gave them hot chocolate, bundled them back up, and yeah, our son Eric was quite upset. He said, he used some words even at that age. And I gave him a little slap for that. But it was hard because the kids didn't know. And they didn't know the reason why we had to do such nonsense in his eyes, because he was at that age.
Right. And throughout the book, you have lots of stories, vignettes that sort of sound like they're out of spy novels. You mentioned it, I think, in your first assignment, you learned that the apartment that you moved into, the landlord and your neighbor was probably a KGB spy and may have had listening devices embedded in the walls. That had to be a really disturbing thing to learn.
It was very disturbing. Rolf came home one evening and said, our neighbor is a KGB spy and we're moving. So, we moved the next day. It was an eye-opener. It really was, because in those days I was still inexperienced, and it was exciting, but how real is the whole thing? And yeah, it really was an eye-opener. And I have to say I was even a little sad, because I really liked the landlord and the landlady, but I guess that's what it's all about, that the trusting factor.
And then there was yet another assignment where you found out that your home was under surveillance and had to move fairly quickly. So another one of those situations when it was brought it literally home to you.
Bill, and why was this happening to us? I'm sure there are others out there too, but I felt like, what are we the only people that's happening to? But that one was a little bit different in the fact that I actually I felt worried and what could happen. So we did see surveillance. I should say I saw surveillance. We had a park across the street where we lived. And I saw this guy taking pictures, and he acted, well, I was certainly aware that something must be going on. And I mentioned it to Rolf, he mentioned it to the office. And we had a surveillance team coming to the house early in the morning, and the lift with us basically, to see what was going on. And then I want to mention that one of our friends who we have known from our first assignment lived down the street from us. And they had an assassination attempt on him. He miraculously survived, but only because some animal, a cat or dog or something, ran across the street and the driver had to slow down or even stop for a few seconds when a bomb went off. So that friend of ours, not American, from a different embassy, he got seriously injured, and but it didn't kill him. For us, when the team came in, and so yes, we kept, even after that, they saw surveillance. Yeah, we had to. Rolf came home one evening. We're moving out tomorrow, and it was a whirlwind, and that was the first time I said to Rolf, "This is insane. One of these days, I'm going to write a book." It was a dark and stormy night when we had to leave, because it was a dark and stormy night. And and off we went to a hotel. And I'm not saying a resort hotel. It was not so good. So the whole thing, we at that point actually we packed out. Everything was packed out and sent to storage, and kept there until our next assignment. That was a rough time.
One of the
And because
difficult
especially
parts
because
for
Rolf
you.
worked at the time in the terrorism branch, and I never saw him because it was right after the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. So yeah, I never saw him. That was a tough time.
And while you were overseas, in addition to sometimes working as a contract spouse, you also took on some non-CIA jobs at the embassies, some really interesting jobs. And one was head of protocol at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow under two ambassadors, I think it was. It had to be a fascinating job for you, to give you different kinds of insights into life at the embassy and what's going on other parts of the U.S. community overseas.
It really was. I mean, that job was just the best. As I said, as you said, I was in charge of protocol. I worked for Ambassador Strauss for a few months, and then Ambassador Pickering came. And Ambassador Pickering is a well-known and respected diplomat. I loved him and his wife. I just respected them so much. And I met everybody from our host country, administration and government, and our government. Everybody came to that place, and it was just wonderful. And I was in charge of having to send out invitations and the dinners and the receptions. I had two women working for me, and we were a great team, and it all worked out really well. And during that time, of course, we had a coup. Right, the coup in '93. And it was, I worked at the time, I worked at Spies, so House the Ambassador's residence. So we had, in front of the embassy, we had tanks lined up. So pulling out of the compound onto the street, it was a surreal sight to see tanks and soldiers with their machine guns. And it actually, yeah, and eventually, of course, as we all know, it came to a head. And we had all the family members, I mean, everybody in the offices too. We all had to go to an underground gym that we had at the compound. Rolf was out in the streets, so I had the three, yeah, at the Kelsey at the time, the three kids, and Kelsey was always on me. She was a baby. I had her in a little pouch. I always said she's the static cling. I would never go anywhere without her on me. But it was very tough. You would hear, when it finally erupted, the White House, they call it the White House to the Parliament. What happened is that the embassy is right across from the parliament. So we were in a crossfire of the whole thing happening. Had we lived somewhere else, like some of the embassy folks did, out half an hour away in this new compound, they weren't even aware on it. But so it was surreal watching CNN on TV and smelling the gunfire in the gym. And we had to be there for several days. And yeah, and I even I have in my book, and I don't even like talking about it, but friends of ours, and I thought we were good friends, but when the wife said, get a, because we had, of course, the gym has those mats, but they don't have that many for everybody who was down in the gym. So my friend said, get a mat for Rosie and the kids. And he said, no, I'm taking care of my own family. So I didn't have Rolf with me. I had my kids. But by time I could try to get a mat, they were gone. So that was a little bit disappointed in the aspect of, what do people do in a situation? Will they help you, or is it really all for themselves? That was
Literally
a little
under
sad.
fire. Yes, they had to be.
That was sad. And I don't want to dwell too much onto it because it's in my book. But we also had then the people coming over the wall, which we knew. We were informed, people coming over the wall. Who knew what could have happened? And one of our Marines did get shot. And it was all, I mean, the Marines, the security team, our doctor there, they're the heroes.
At what point did you end up telling your kids the true nature of the family business? That's always fascinating to
Yeah.
non-CIA people, to find out when the CIA kids find out what mom or dad actually do for a living. But how did you break the news to them?
So, each kid, of course, is different, and only a parent will know when a kid is ready to know the truth. We told Eric pretty early on, I think he must have been 12 or 13, pretty early on. And he was so relieved to hear that, because he thought Dad is always out at night because, can I say that? Because he's having an affair. So he was so relieved when he heard it's because of his work. And then I told our girls, probably also when Christina was about 14 or so, and Kelsey was even younger. But we took a trip to Florida, and that's when we told them. And they thought, of course, he was joking. Our dad, there's no way. And they were just laughing and laughing, and James Bond. But after a while, they realized, no, this is it. But we telling them, you cannot talk about it. This is serious business, and so forth. But as I said, each kid is different. So each parent will know when that time comes.
What was the hardest part about living a life of a CIA spouse overseas and raising a family overseas?
So I would say just the fact that it's a life of secrecy and always having to deceive your friends. He actually in the States as well, but overseas you meet people you really like, not any for business or anything. But of course, people are curious. People want to know, where do you work? What do you do? And so that part I always found difficult.
And what was the best part of the experience overseas? What did you enjoy most and treasure the most?
Really, everything. Other than the fact of living a life of secrecy and being deceitful, I loved I loved everything about it. Again, because I felt privileged that I can experience that. Somebody who's a naturalized citizen, I'm here, I'm working for them, I can contribute to the country in my little ways. Yeah, that I will never take for granted.
Your book ends by saying at one point you did become a CIA staff officer. So I'm wondering, do you have a second book in you? Is there another story yet to be told?
I do, Bill. I started a second book talking about when I was the officer. And yes, and touching a little bit upon again the kids, because when I left, well, Rolf, of course, too, when Rolf and I was my assignment, but when he was the trailing spouse. And I have to say, I'm gonna, our assignments, the men loved Rolf because they loved the fact that he could lounge around by the pool, write his book. And the women loved him because they thought of him as this supporting husband going with his wife to her assignment. But, and I touch upon, we left when Kelsey started college. And I was a little hesitant. I hadn't planned to accept the assignment. But when Kelsey started school, and she always said, I want to go to a college that's close enough. When I want to come home, I can come home, but far away enough so you cannot come every weekend. So I said, okay, how about that, Kelsey? We're going overseas. So she was actually happy because she experienced the Middle East where we ended up going, spending the summers and working at the embassy.
Well, we'll look forward to the second book as well. But for this one, we highly recommend The Story of a CIA Wife Married to the Craft by Rosie Mowatt-Larssen. And we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Bill. It was a pleasure. And we'll talk again when the second book is out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.